but I'm here. And the whole place started clapping. The whole place started clapping because people recognize that it's long overdue time for us to come together and just treat each other in the way that we wish we could be treated and fight for each other, understanding that an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. We stand together united as Americans because divided we fall.
I have to visit Hawaii in about 10 days or 2 weeks.
You have
and so
to.
I have to. And so one of the things I probably will have to at least think about is a controversy there about Mauna Kea.
Yes.
The construction of a telescope.
Will you be going to that island?
No,
Okay.
but I will be giving a talk where I might be getting questions about this.
I'm
I
sure.
want to ask you first.
Sure.
You know, it's a controversy because
Yeah.
a lot of Native Hawaiians oppose the building of this telescope. Tell us what your stance is on this, because this is an issue where your negotiating skills might have to come into play.
Yeah, you know, it's an unfortunate thing that's dividing a lot of folks in Hawaii right now. There is a powerful movement of kia'i, or protectors, who are there at the base of Mauna Kea right now, literally putting their bodies and camping out there to try to stop the construction of, I believe, what would be the largest telescope in the world. There are already a number of telescopes that have been built on the top of Mauna Kea. Just for some background, for Native Hawaiians, Mauna Kea is a sacred place. It's a place where Native Hawaiian practitioners will go to worship. For them, this is their church. And so when you look at the massive construction that would take years to build this telescope, just try to imagine a telescope or a major object being built in your place of worship, or some place that's special and sacred to you. So that's really what's at the heart of why they're gathered there and protesting this construction. There are other Native Hawaiians who support it, who talk about Native Hawaiian history in astrology and navigation of the seas using the stars, and that this is bringing technology to that. I think the counterpoint is there's another place in Spain, in the Canary Islands, that really wants this telescope, and maybe they should have it there. The controversy here is the governor is doing all that he can to push the project forward in spite of these protests. The project has gone through all of the legal steps and met every one of those steps. So this is really a point here about do you follow the steps that have been laid out in the law, or is there really a bigger conversation here that has to be had about Native Hawaiian practitioners and the preservation of sacred places? So my position on this is that there are a number of telescopes that have already been built. There are a number of them that are already decommissioned, that are no longer being used. And the desecration of this sacred place is an issue that has never been addressed with the Native Hawaiian community. So before any talk of actually beginning construction takes place, they need to make things right with the Native Hawaiian community first. There you go. Hawaii's in the house.
Representative, you talk about this change that needs to happen in this culture of warmongering. Can you kind of expand on that? I mean, Richard mentioned the cancellations at Camp David. You have your experience as a vet, 2 tours. What do you mean by that? And what's kind of the change you're hoping to see with that?
You know, I had a soon-to-be graduating high school student came to one of our events the other night, and the very first thing out of his mouth was, "We have been at war longer than I've been alive." Like, that was a very striking thing for this young man to come and share with me, that this was having such an impact on him, that in his life as a young American, he's never known anything different. As president and commander-in-chief, and this is what's driving me to run for president, to bring that experience that I have, both as a soldier, serving now for over 16 years, of deploying twice to the Middle East, of serving in a medical unit, seeing that high cost of war, combined with the experience that I bring from almost 7 years in Congress, focused on the Armed Services Committee, Foreign Affairs Committee, Homeland Security Committee, bringing the combination of these experiences, the understanding, and most importantly, the conviction to be able to bring about the sea change in foreign policy, standing up to the military-industrial complex that's profited heavily from our being at war for so long, and to hold strong against the foreign policy establishment in Washington that you see has carried influence over both Democrat and Republican administrations. It's not a partisan thing. To bring about an end to these wasteful regime change wars, work to end this new Cold War we alluded to, with escalating tensions between the US and Russia and China and the arms race that goes with that, and redirect those trillions of dollars we've been spending towards actually serving the needs of our people. And things like healthcare for all, things like education, infrastructure, protecting our environment, addressing climate change. We've got to get our priorities straight in this country. And while doing so, recognize that saying we'll end wasteful wars does not equate isolationism. It doesn't mean we turn our back on the world and only look inward. No, it means that we fulfill our potential and actually lead the world in being a force for good, leading with a foreign policy based on cooperation rather than conflict, being able to resolve our differences through diplomacy and explore our potential, finding that common interest that we share with countries around the world.
Unlike most members of Congress, I think he likes you. I think he likes you.
There you go.
Unlike most members of Congress, you know how to fire a gun.
Yes.
And a rifle. And you brought up that generation of Americans that have known no other day but being at war. And that is the same generation that has known no other day that has included this active shooter generation. I've had to cover way too many of these stories. As we now mark 292 mass shootings as of this weekend, that number went up by another one, by the way, in the last several days. What is your plan as you return to Congress and as president to address gun violence in America that is real progress when we see and you know this better than most folks in this room, that we've had way too much this side and that side and nothing moving forward?
Exactly. I mean, that really gets to the heart of the problem there, Richard, is how such a powerful and important issue as keeping our children safe, keeping our loved ones safe, has been relegated to such a divisive one. That is one of these issues that's really tearing our country apart when you look at it from the political sense. But when you're actually just talking to folks, and the polls are showing this, that more Americans across party lines agree on the common sense gun safety legislation reforms that we need to pass by far, over 80% in most cases. So knowing this, it begs the question, why has nothing been done? It's because in Washington, the day-to-day and the policies are driven by the extremes, with a whole lot of fear factoring going on both sides, and both sides pointing the finger at the other saying you're the problem, but no actual problem solving taking place. So we voted on legislation and passed it with bipartisan support out of the House of Representatives months ago to make sure that there's universal mandatory background checks. The tragedy and the murder that we saw just took place in El Paso is one example where it appears that a universal background check would have prevented that shooter from being able to purchase a gun. That's what these sensible reforms are in place for, to prevent those who would seek to do harm to others from being able to put a gun, this weapon, in their hands. Now, when you look at the extremes, you've got on one side people who say that there should be no restriction whatsoever to their Second Amendment rights, none whatsoever. And on the other hand, you have folks who are saying, well, we shouldn't have any guns at all. We should repeal the Second Amendment. But it's a false choice, in my opinion. And I think most Americans agree that we can and should uphold our Second Amendment rights, while also making sure that those who are owning guns are doing so in a safe manner and will not do harm to others, who are not going to use those guns to others.
But what will your message be this week, right? Let's get to your job at hand today, because you can actually do something. You're an elected member of Congress from the great state of Hawaii.
Well, we're going back to Congress next week, continuing to push to pass legislation, calling on Mitch McConnell to pass the bills that the House has already passed to make these changes. I think this is where, and reaching out to Republicans in doing so. Again, we've got to make it so that this is not the partisan issue it has become and has been for so long. So much of that pressure to make an impact and to make a difference needs to come from the grassroots. It is the people of this country that need to come together and say, hey, Senator McConnell, do your job. Let the people vote. Let our voices be heard.
Perhaps the most important issue for Asian American Pacific Islander voters, like it is for most people, is the economy.
Yeah.
Economic inequality. How would you address this? I assume you think it's a real issue, but
It is a real issue.
How would you address? What are the concrete things that you would do to address economic inequality? Would it be higher taxes on the wealthy? Would it be higher minimum wage? What are your policies?
I mean, as you mentioned, this is a problem that is taking a toll increasingly on the Asian American community, but it's one also that's further driving a wedge between the haves and the have-nots in this country. And I think there are deep issues that we need to address in policy making that reflect in our tax code and in our trade policy. The scales are weighted towards the rich and powerful and the big corporations who benefit the most that end up leaving everyone else behind. I think this is what's at the heart of the problem. You've got the rich and government of the rich and powerful rather than a government of, by, and for the people. The fact that Amazon has gone without paying taxes now for a few years and has also gotten millions of dollars in a tax credit while the rest of the people pay their taxes and do their duty and struggle often in fulfilling that speaks to the heart of the problem here. There are I just mentioned briefly trade policy. It's the same problem. You know, when these massive trade deals are negotiated, we've seen time and time again who is hurt most by them and who benefits from them. It's big multinational corporations who benefit, and it's the American worker that loses in the process. We've got to make sure that people in this country are able to earn a living wage. You know, there's a bill and an effort that's moving across the country as we fight for a $15 minimum wage. But even, again, in